Joe Rogan is here to entertain you, not to be a trusted source of information. There is a difference.
And now, a look at this week in podcasting news. It's the Jag Show Podcast.
Last night, a friend of mine posted a meme that said, "Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." On one side was a baseball fan at a game with a COVID-vaccinated QR code on a bracelet. On the other side, a tattoo from a concentration camp. Needless to say, I was offended, particularly as a Jewish man. But before I chimed in, I read the other comments. My friend, as it turned out, had heard on Joe Rogan's podcast that in Australia, the unvaccinated were being banished to certain areas. I looked into this. There is, of course, no evidence that's the case. I stated as such and politely told my friend that I was offended by his meme. He messaged me this morning, told me he took the meme down, appreciated my feedback, and gave me permission to tell the story on today's show. Now, I should mention in full disclosure, the meme itself didn't come from Joe, but when my friend posted it, he saw it through the prism of what he'd heard on the Rogan podcast, which he took to be a reliable source. Okay, what does this have to do with your podcast and the industry as a whole? Well, Joe Rogan is the single most successful solo podcaster on the planet. Regardless of politics, he entertains and he offers compelling content. Here's the problem. He's not a news source. The problem is, when an entertainment show's popularity hits the stratosphere, people take its information to be reliable. Popularity does not equal credibility. So whether you're listening to a podcast or watching CNN, Fox News, or MSNBC, please know whether you're consuming news or entertainment. That line is often blurry. And when you're producing content, make it clear to your audience which of the two they're listening to. Okay, on to this week's podcasting news. Apple released iOS version 15 on Monday, which includes personalized recommendations in the Apple Podcasts app. Speaking of Apple, will this be the year that Spotify finally overtakes them in podcast listenership? Website eMarketer thinks so. They feel Spotify will have 28.2 million podcast listeners by the end of 2021, compared with an even 28 million only for Apple. They think the gap's going to widen after that, and also say not to sleep on YouTube and Google Podcasts either. A new study from Nielsen says podcast growth is being fueled by light listeners, those who listen to 3 or less podcasts a month. This may seem concerning on the surface, but I think this is a good thing. This means the space is growing to a wider tent, and if these listeners can find good, compelling shows, they won't be light users for long. And finally, a perfect example of when it's appropriate to release an old episode. With the passing of Norm Macdonald this week, Mark Maron re-released a 2011 interview he did with the late great comic on his WTF podcast. Rest in peace, Turd Ferguson.
If you like what you just heard, share The Jag Show with someone else who's interested in podcasts. You can also follow The Jag Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For help creating or improving your podcast, visit jagindetroit.com.